The pawn shop sat 2 blocks from the naval base. Small, cluttered, smelling of old metal and other people's desperation. Olivia walked in on her lunch break. Blue and white apron still tied at her waist. Blonde hair pulled back. A small velvet pouch in her hand. She placed them on the glass counter one by one. A silver star, a purple heart, a combat action ribbon, 3 medals that had cost her everything. The owner picked up the silver star, turned it over once. "I can do $40 for the lot." Olivia didn't flinch, didn't argue, just nodded, because $40 was $40, and the eviction notice on her door said Friday. That is when the dog moved. Nobody told it to. Nobody gave a command. The Belgian Malinois simply stood up, walked across the shop, and sat down directly at Olivia's feet. The Navy SEAL holding the leash looked at his dog, then at the woman, then at the medals on the counter, and his face changed completely, because he recognized one of those medals, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that the woman in the waitress apron should never have been standing there. If you believe no hero should ever have to sell their medals to survive, comment honor below and subscribe, because this story will stay with you. The shop sat on a side street 2 blocks from the naval base, the kind of street that exists in every military town without anyone planning it, the kind that fills up quietly with the things people sell when their options have narrowed down to almost nothing. Glass cases full of old jewelry and secondhand electronics, guitars leaning against the wall that nobody was coming back for, a locked cabinet in the back with firearms behind scratched plexiglass. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at a frequency that made everything look slightly worse than it actually was. The owner, mid-50s, heavy-set, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, sat behind the main counter doing something on his phone with the unhurried energy of a man who had been doing this long enough to know that desperation always found its way to him eventually. He did not need to go looking for it. It walked through the door on its own. It walked through the door at 12:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, wearing a blue and white waitress apron and carrying a small velvet pouch in its right hand. Olivia had been trying to come in here for 3 days. She had walked past the window twice on Monday and once on Sunday, and both times she had kept moving because stopping felt too final, and she had not been ready for final yet. But the notice on her apartment door said Friday, and Tuesday was already here. She walked straight to the counter without browsing and without hesitating, because hesitation would have given her enough time to talk herself out of it again. She opened the velvet pouch and placed 3 medals on the glass surface one at a time with both hands. A silver star, a purple heart with a gold star device, a combat action ribbon. She set each one down the way you set something down when you know the weight of what you are placing on the surface. The owner looked up from his phone, looked at the medals, looked at her. His expression did not change, because his expression very rarely did. He picked up the silver star first, turned it over in his thick fingers, read the engraving on the back, name, date, citation reference number, set it down, picked up the purple heart, examined the edge the way a man examines something he is already calculating a number for, set it beside the first one. Then he leaned back in his chair with the professional detachment of someone who had learned long ago that sentiment was the enemy of margin. $40 for the lot, he said. Olivia looked at the medals on the counter between them. The silver star alone is worth considerably more than— "To a collector, maybe," he said, already looking back at his phone. "To me it's 40. You want it or not?" She did not argue. She had known he would say something like this. She had told herself on the walk over that the number did not matter as long as it covered the gap between what she had and what Friday required. She looked at the medals for one moment longer than necessary. "I need a minute," she said. "Can I have a minute?" He shrugged without looking up. "Take your time." She stepped back from the counter and turned toward the window. Outside, the street was moving and ordinary and completely unbothered by what was happening on the other side of the glass. She pressed her lips together once. Just once. That was all she allowed. She had been pressing her lips together and allowing nothing else for 3 years, and she was not going to stop now in a pawn shop on a Tuesday afternoon over $40 and a man with reading glasses on his forehead. The door opened at 12:19 p.m. She heard it but did not turn around. A Belgian Malinois in a military harness walked in ahead of its handler, moving with the easy precision of an animal trained past the point where anything it does is accidental. The man behind the leash was late 30s, broad across the shoulders, civilian clothes that did nothing to disguise what he was. Lieutenant Commander James Mercer came in here occasionally to look at the vintage watch cases, an old habit he had never fully explained to anyone. He was moving toward the far display case when the dog stopped walking. Just stopped, mid-stride. No command, no warning, Atlas turned his head toward the woman standing at the window in the blue and white apron, and his ears went fully forward, and his body went completely still in the specific way it went still when he had already decided something. He walked across the shop floor toward Olivia on a loose lead until the leash went taut. Then he sat down at her feet in a perfect military rest position and did not move. Mercer gave the command once. Atlas did not respond. Mercer gave it again. Atlas looked up at Olivia instead. In 4 years of working together, Mercer had learned that when Atlas did something he could not explain, it was because Atlas had already understood something he had not caught up to yet. He looked at the woman. She was looking down at his dog with an expression that was composed and careful and carrying something enormous underneath the composure. Then Mercer looked past her to the glass counter, and the rest of the shop stopped existing, because lying on Daryl's counter next to a loaf of bread nobody had bought was a silver star, and beside it a purple heart with a gold star device. And Mercer did not need to pick it up to know that what he was looking at was not a replica and not a decoration and not something that belonged under fluorescent lights next to second-hand guitars. He took 3 steps toward the counter, picked up the silver star without asking permission, turned it over. Read the back. His jaw went tight. He read it again because his brain had done the thing brains do when information arrives that does not fit into any category currently available to them. He set the medal down carefully, turned to look at Olivia. She was already watching him, calm, steady, the expression of someone who has just been seen doing something she did not want to be seen doing, and has made her peace with the fact that it cannot be undone. "These yours?" Mercer asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. She looked at the medals between them on the counter, then at him. She could see in his face that he already knew, that whatever was engraved on the back of that silver star had already told him more than she had planned to tell anyone in this shop on this particular afternoon. "Yes," she said. One word, nothing attached to it. Mercer looked down at Atlas, still sitting at her feet in the position he reserved for one person in the world. And Lieutenant Commander James Mercer, 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments, a man who had learned to keep his face neutral in rooms considerably more dangerous than this one, could not find a single thing to say. He did not make a speech, did not introduce himself or explain why he was there or what he intended to do about what he had just seen. He simply picked up the silver star from the counter and held it in both hands with the specific reverence of someone who understands exactly what the weight of a thing means, not the physical weight, the other kind, and looked at the owner with an expression that communicated several things at once, and none of them were warm. "What did you offer her?" he asked. Daryl looked between Mercer and Olivia with the instinct of a man who has learned when a transaction has moved into territory he does not want to be responsible for. 40 for the lot, he said carefully. Mercer looked at the silver star in his hands, then at the purple heart, then back at Daryl with the patient expression of someone who is choosing his next words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "A named silver star citation goes for between 3,000 and 8,000 at a legitimate military auction," he said. The purple heart with a gold star device adds another 2 to 4. $40 is not an offer. It's an insult. Daryl shifted his weight. "I'm running a business," he said. "Not a museum." Mercer set the silver star back on the counter without responding to that. He turned to Olivia. She was standing with her arms crossed and her posture straight, and the expression of someone who would rather be in any other place on earth than standing in this shop having this particular conversation in front of this particular stranger. She had the velvet pouch in one hand, and she was holding it the way people hold things they are about to put back because the conversation has gone somewhere they did not plan for, and retreating feels like the only available option. "I'll buy them," Mercer said. "Right now, full value." Olivia looked at him for a long, steady moment. "I don't know you," she said. Her voice was even, not rude, not grateful, just a fact being stated by someone who deals in facts. "No," Mercer agreed. "But I know what those are." He gestured toward the medals. "And I know they don't belong on that counter." Something moved across her face, brief and complicated, arriving and departing in the same second. And then her expression closed again, like a door being shut with great deliberate care. "I appreciate that," she said. "But I don't need help." "If you have ever been too proud to accept help when you needed it most," comment pride below. Because what Olivia does in the next few minutes is the most human thing we have ever seen her do. And the hardest. Mercer looked at her. He did not look at the eviction notice folded and partially visible above the neckline of her apron pocket, where she had tucked it that morning for reference. He had enough respect not to look at it directly. But he had seen it the moment she turned from the window, and he had understood immediately what it was, and what it meant, and what Tuesday afternoon in a pawn shop 2 blocks from the naval base actually cost this woman in a way that had nothing to do with $40. "You came in here on your lunch break," he said quietly. "Still in your uniform." Olivia said nothing. "You placed those medals on the counter one at a time," he continued. "Which means you have been thinking about this for longer than today." Still nothing. "And you didn't argue when he said 40, Mercer finished. "Which means whatever you need the money for has a deadline." She looked at him with an expression that had a wall behind it and something considerably more complicated behind the wall. "You're very observant," she said. "For someone I've never met." Atlas shifted his weight at her feet. She glanced down at the dog briefly, one small unguarded moment, and then back up. "What unit?" Mercer asked. She met his eyes, held them for a moment that lasted slightly longer than a simple refusal would require. "That's classified," she said. Flat, reflexive, completely automatic. The way people say things they have said so many times they no longer hear themselves saying them. And the way she said it, the specific cadence of it, the absence of hesitation, the total lack of self-consciousness, told Mercer everything he needed to know about what kind of unit and what kind of classified and what kind of woman was standing in front of him trying to sell her silver star for grocery money. He reached into his jacket, produced a card and placed it on the counter beside the medals. "Naval Special Warfare Command, Veteran Support Division. There are emergency assistance channels," he said, "for personnel with sealed service records. It doesn't go through the VA. It doesn't take 6 months. I can make a call right now." Olivia looked at the card without picking it up. "I have managed on my own for 3 years, she said. "I don't need the Navy managing it for me now." Mercer nodded slowly. "I understand that," he said. "But managing on your own and selling your silver star are 2 very different things." That landed. She did not show it the way most people would show it. No flinch, no intake of breath, no visible reaction. But something shifted behind her eyes in a way that Mercer recognized because he had seen it before in debrief rooms and hospital corridors and the specific kind of conversations that happen between people who have been somewhere terrible and are still finding their way back from it. She put the medals back in the velvet pouch one by one without speaking, closed the drawstring, turned toward the door. "Thank you for the information," she said. "I'll look into other options." And she walked toward the exit with the same controlled, unhurried pace she brought to everything. Not rushing, not retreating, just moving. The way trained people move when they have made a decision and do not intend to revisit it. Atlas stood the moment she moved. He pressed his body sideways against her leg, not blocking her path, not aggressive, just present in the specific way that dogs are present when they have made their own decision about where they need to be. Olivia looked down at him. Something in her posture shifted by a fraction. Not much, just enough to show that the dog had reached something the conversation had not. Mercer watched from the counter and said quietly, "He doesn't do that. Not with anyone. Not once in 4 years." She did not turn around. Her hand moved to the door handle. "There was a woman," Mercer said. "His previous handler, 7 years ago. A captain named Sarah Reeves." Olivia's hand stopped on the handle. She did not pull the door open, did not turn around. Just stood completely still with her hand on the handle and the velvet pouch against her chest and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. 3 full seconds of absolute stillness. Then she turned, slowly. Her expression had changed in a way that no amount of training could have fully prevented because the name he had just said was not one she had expected to hear in a pawn shop on a Tuesday, and it had arrived like something she had buried a long time ago, choosing its own moment to surface. "How do you know that name?" she asked. Her voice was still controlled. But only just. Mercer looked at her steadily across the shop. "Because she was my commanding officer," he said. "And she told me once, if Atlas ever does what he just did with someone, don't let them walk away." And Olivia stood in the middle of the pawn shop with the door behind her and the velvet pouch in her hands and a Navy SEAL in front of her and his dog pressed against her leg and said the only thing she had left to say. "She never told me she had a dog." They sat on the bench outside the pawn shop. Atlas between them without being placed there. He had simply chosen the position the way he chose everything, with complete certainty and no explanation offered. The afternoon moved past them on the street, ordinary and unhurried, entirely unaware of what was happening on the bench. Mercer told her what he knew about Captain Sarah Reeves. Not everything. Some things about Captain Reeves were still sealed in files that required clearances he no longer held. But enough. She had commanded his unit for 14 months. She had made a decision at the end of a mission nobody discussed openly that had saved 6 people and ended her command in the same breath. Mercer had been a junior officer then. He had never been given the full picture, just the shape of it, the outline of a decision made by a woman who understood that some choices only have one right answer, even when every other answer is easier. He had carried the shape of that story for 7 years without anywhere proper to set it down. Olivia listened without interrupting. Her hands were in her lap, velvet pouch between them, the street noise filling the silence around what he was saying. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to mean something. "She was my squad commander," she said. "First 18 months. Mercer looked at her. "The mission," he said carefully. She nodded once. "She made the call that got them out," Olivia said. "I made the call that finished it." She did not elaborate. She did not need to, and she knew it, and so did he. There were 2 sides to every classified operation, and the people who finished things were rarely the ones the citations named loudly. He looked at the velvet pouch. "The silver star," he said. "That was for finishing it." She looked at the pouch in her lap. "Among other things," she said quietly. The 3 words carried the weight of everything she was not going to say, and they both understood that. Atlas put his head in her lap. She looked down at him, the same brief, unguarded look she had given him in the shop, the kind that arrives before the training can stop it. And this time she let her hand rest on top of his head for a full moment before she straightened again. Mercer watched and said nothing, because Atlas had just told him more about this woman's history with Captain Reeves than any document he had ever been cleared to read. "She talked about you," Mercer said. Olivia looked at him. "She never used a name," he continued. "Just said there was someone on the ground who never missed. Said if you ever meet someone who makes the room feel safer just by being in it, trust that feeling." Something moved across Olivia's face, deep and brief, and quickly contained the way everything real was quickly contained. "She was a good commander," Olivia said. "She deserved better than what that mission gave her." Mercer nodded once. "So did you," he said simply. She did not answer that. She looked at the street instead. He made 3 calls. He walked 10 feet down the sidewalk each time and spoke quietly and came back with something more concrete than before. The first call confirmed she qualified for emergency assistance through a Naval Special Warfare Welfare Fund that operated completely outside the standard VA system. A fund specifically for personnel whose service records were partially or fully classified, which meant the standard channels had never been able to verify her history, which meant she had been falling through a gap that the system had created and never bothered to close. The second call confirmed the amount. 4 months of rent, utilities included, available within 24 hours. The third call was to someone whose name Mercer did not say out loud and whose response made him exhale slowly through his nose, in the way people exhale when something they were not certain would work has worked. He came back and sat on the bench and told her what was available, and he was careful about how he framed it because he had already understood enough about this woman to know that the framing mattered as much as the number. "This isn't charity," he said before she could speak. "This fund exists for personnel whose classified service history made the standard support channels inaccessible. You paid into this with every operation you ran and every benefit you couldn't claim because your record was sealed. This money is yours. It has been yours for 3 years, and the system just couldn't find you to give it to you." Olivia looked at the middle distance. "I applied twice," she said quietly. "They said they couldn't verify my service." Mercer nodded. "Because most of it doesn't exist on paper," he said. "I just verified you. That was enough." She looked at him. "You verified me based on a dog and a silver star," she said. "And a name," he replied. "Captain Reeves vouched for you 7 years ago to anyone who would listen. I was listening." She was quiet for a long time. Atlas had not moved from beside her. The lunch hour was ending, and she had 8 minutes before she needed to be back at the diner, and the velvet pouch was still in her hands, and none of this felt simple or clean or easy in the way that receiving something never feels simple when you have spent 3 years convincing yourself you do not need anything. "I don't like owing people," she said finally. Mercer shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said. You owe yourself 3 years of support you were entitled to and never received." She looked at the pouch, then at Atlas, then at the card still in Mercer's hand between them on the bench. "If I take this," she said carefully, "I want it on record that I intend to pay it back." Mercer looked at her for a moment. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, just the territory adjacent to one. "I'll make sure they note that," he said. She reached out and took the card, held it without looking at it, opened the velvet pouch and placed it on top of the silver star, not putting it away, just resting it there, the card touching the metal, both of them in the same small space. And sitting on a bench outside a pawn shop with 8 minutes before her shift resumed and a Navy SEAL beside her and his dog pressed against her leg, Olivia looked like exactly what she was underneath everything else. Not a sealed file, not a classified record, not a waitress, just a person who had given more than should ever have been asked of anyone and was sitting in the afternoon light trying to figure out how to accept something back without it costing her the last thing she had left, which was the knowledge that she had survived all of it entirely on her own. She stood, straightened her apron, picked up the velvet pouch, and that was when Mercer said the thing that stopped her for the second time that afternoon. "One more thing," he said quietly. "Atlas, you asked what his name means." She looked at him. She had not asked, but she waited. "In Greek mythology," Mercer said, looking at his dog, "Atlas is the one who holds everything up." Olivia looked at the dog for a long moment, at the amber eyes and the military harness and everything sitting between this animal and a name she had not spoken out loud since the mission that had ended everything and started something else entirely. Then she turned and walked back toward the diner without another word. But the velvet pouch was in her inside pocket now, and the card was inside it, and her hand stayed over that pocket for the first 3 steps before she made herself lower it. And that, more than anything she had said on that bench, was the only answer that actually mattered. She worked the rest of the afternoon shift the same way she worked every shift, steady, unhurried, present without being noticed. She refilled, she cleared. She smiled at the right moments and said of course and have a good one and come back soon and meant none of it more or less than she meant it on any other Tuesday. The other staff noticed nothing different. The regulars noticed nothing different. The manager noticed nothing different. But the velvet pouch was in her inside jacket pocket, hanging on the hook in the back hallway, and she was aware of it, the way you are aware of something small and significant that has shifted position in your life. Not heavily, just differently than before. The card was inside the pouch. The card was on top of the silver star, and the silver star was not on Daryl's counter anymore. That was the part she kept coming back to between tables. Not the money, not the 4 months. Just the fact that she had walked out of that shop with the medals still in her possession, and she had not entirely planned for that outcome when she walked in. At 4:47 p.m., she untied her apron and hung it on the hook and put on her jacket and picked up her bag. She had not heard from Mercer since the bench. She had told herself that was fine, that she had the card, that she would make the call herself when she was ready, that the outcome did not depend on whether he followed up or disappeared entirely into the naval base 15 kilometers down the road, and never thought about a Tuesday afternoon pawn shop again. She came through the kitchen door into the dining area and stopped walking. Atlas was sitting in the center of the room facing the kitchen door, with the calm, focused patience of a dog that has been waiting and has never once doubted that the waiting would end correctly. Mercer was at the counter, 2 cups of coffee already poured, one in front of him and one in the space beside him that he had not turned to look at yet. He just pushed the second cup slightly toward the empty stool without turning around. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked to the counter and sat down. Neither of them spoke for a while. The diner was quiet in the way it gets at the end of the afternoon shift when the rush has passed and the evening has not yet decided to begin. Atlas moved to her side and sat in the same position he had held all day, present, certain, completely unbothered by the question of whether he belonged there. "It cleared," Mercer said. He slid a printed confirmation across the counter without ceremony. She looked at it without picking it up. 4 months. Utilities included. The number at the top was specific and real, and more than she had allowed herself to expect when she was being honest with herself about what was realistic. She folded it once and put it in her jacket pocket. "I meant what I said," she told him, "about paying it back." He nodded. I noted it, he said. She picked up her coffee. Thank you, she said. 2 words, no decoration, the way she said everything that actually mattered, plainly and without anything extra attached. Mercer reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed the velvet pouch on the counter between them. She looked at it, then at him. You left it on the bench, he said. She had not left it on the bench. She had been holding it when she stood up, and he knew that, and she knew that he knew that, and neither of them said anything about it for a moment. She understood that he had taken it without announcing it, because he had already calculated that she might go back to the pawn shop after her shift if she still had them in her hands, and $40 was still $40, and Friday was still Friday. She looked at the pouch on the counter. You had no right, she said quietly. No, he agreed without hesitation. I didn't. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who have already said the important things and are now simply sitting with them. Thank you, she said again. The same 2 words carrying an entirely different weight the second time. She opened the pouch and placed the 3 medals on the counter between them in the same order she had placed them on Daryl's glass surface that morning. Silver Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon. They looked different here, in the warm late light of the diner on the worn wooden counter she had wiped down 1,000 times, more like what they actually were, and less like what $40 had briefly threatened to make them. Mercer looked at them without touching them. Just looked, the way things deserve to be looked at when they have earned it. Captain Reeves, Olivia said quietly, her eyes on the Silver Star. Did she know what happened after? What I did to finish it? Mercer was quiet for a moment. She knew you finished it, he said. She said that was the only thing that mattered. Olivia looked at the medal, the name on the back facing up in the warm light. She was wrong, she said softly. It wasn't the only thing. She did not say what else mattered. She did not need to. The medals on the counter between them were already saying it. She put them back one by one, the same care going in as coming out. Slowly, both hands. The way you handle something that belongs to a version of yourself you have not fully made peace with yet, but are no longer willing to sell. She pulled the drawstring closed and put the pouch in her inside jacket pocket where it had been all afternoon. Then she picked up her coffee and finished it and set the cup down and looked at the diner the way she looked at the diner every evening at the end of her shift. The worn tables, the chalkboard specials, the light coming through the front window at the angle that made everything look warmer and more permanent than it probably was. Atlas put his head on her knee. She looked down at him, and this time her hand went to the top of his head and stayed there, not for a second, not briefly, just stayed, the way a person lets something stay when they have finally stopped calculating the cost of it. Mercer watched his dog and said nothing because Atlas had just finished telling him the story that no classified file would ever contain. Same time next week? Olivia asked. She was looking at the window when she said it, not at him, in the specific way people look away from things that matter to them when they are not quite ready to look directly at them yet. Mercer wrapped both hands around his cup. Atlas will want his usual table, he said. Something moved across her face. Unguarded and warm and entirely real, the first completely unguarded thing she had shown since she placed 3 medals on a glass counter at 12:15 p.m. and waited for a number that was never going to be enough. She stood, put on her jacket, reached down and pressed her palm flat against the top of Atlas's head once, firm, deliberate, the greeting of someone who has known dogs like this before and knows exactly what language they speak. Then she walked out into the evening. The velvet pouch was in her inside pocket. The confirmation was folded beside it, and the notice on her apartment door that had said Friday was already a thing that had been true this morning and would not be true tomorrow. She did not go back to the pawn shop. She went home, made tea, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet that she had always preferred to noise, and looked at the 3 medals she had placed on the table in front of her. Not to sell, not to trade, not for $40 or any other number. Just to look at them in her own light, in her own space, for the first time in a long time. And for the first time in 3 years of managing entirely on her own, the apartment did not feel like something she was fighting to keep. It felt like somewhere she had decided to stay. If this story reminded you that even the strongest people sometimes need someone who refuses to let them walk away, subscribe and stay with us. Because there are more people like Olivia out there than we will ever know, carrying more than we will ever see, and every single one of them deserves someone who notices.